Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Brian Kelly, the LSU Tigers kicking off spring practice earlier this week. And Dill, only one practice in, but you're starting to get a feel for some of those questions that we asked the other day in terms of what storylines and questions we have for this LSU program. Want to do a little check-in, talk about how Harold Perkins is going to get used in this defense, talk about the defensive line depth that is probably still a major question mark for a lot of LSU fans. Also have a little conversation about the secondary. Really excited to get into this one. This is a team that, again, if it comes together on the defensive side of the football with Blake Baker, you are looking at a very dangerous LSU team heading into 2024. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and a shout out to the LSU fans, whether we're talking high school recruiting, which we have a breakdown coming in less than 48 hours as LSU is having a monster recruiting weekend. Whether we're doing position deep dives, you guys continue to show a ton of love, a ton of support to the boys. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, the question number one, I think for a lot of us, and that is, how is Harold Perkins going to be used by Blake Baker? And this was one of the things that I was most excited about when Blake Baker gets this defensive coordinator job is you have arguably one of the best defensive players across the country and really wasn't given the opportunity to be that guy for LSU in 2023. You're starting to get your answer, right? Harold Perkins is going to make that transition back to that off-ball linebacker spot. I was looking at some snap counts from last year. Harold Perkins took over 220 snaps as a slot defender in that 2023 season. I look at that where you have, again, one of the most disruptive playmakers on the defensive side of the football, and you're going to take him away from the line of scrimmage, away from where he is most comfortable and where he can impact the game the most. Very happy about Harold Perkins moving back to, I think, that traditional off-ball backer spot where you're going to see him do a lot of different things in this Blake Baker defense.
I mean, that's what you kind of talked about last year when they made that move and kind of sent him back in that linebacker role itself. You like the idea that you could blitz him, that you could use him to spy, that you could use him to do anything. I mean, that's kind of what you were hoping to see. And again, a guy who probably can play that slot defender sort of role, if you
certainly
will.
Athletic enough, but you're talking about having the best player, one of the best players in the country on defense.
You need him around the ball because when you're on the ball, you can impact every play. When you play as a slot defender, you can't impact every play. And I mean, just the way he played, when he makes those plays, that they're all game changers. It's really impressive the clip he can do it at. I'm with you. I think they need to use him like Missouri used Tyron Hopper, frankly. You saw how effective he was at that middle linebacker spot, getting sacks, getting pressure, making big plays. That's where Harold Perkins needs to be in. I wouldn't mind seeing him kick down and play that edge once in a while on third down.
I think you'll see that because you saw Tyron Hopper do it for Missouri. And that's exactly what I have in my notes. Is I have Tyron Hopper 2022 year question mark because that is what I'm looking for. You talk about Blake Baker and was part of the reasons why we're so excited is he knows how to use his personnel, right? Tyron Hopper, one of the best blitzing linebackers that you saw in all of college football. Still, that 2022 year, he led that team in quarterback hurries. I remind you, Elijah McGuire was their starting edge rusher. And Tyron Hopper was the guy getting to the quarterback, being disruptive. I look at Harold Perkins as just a juiced up Tyron Hopper. This is just a better athlete all around than what Hopper was. Can you use him in those same ways that you used Hopper for Missouri in 2022? That's kind of what I'm talking about. And you said it best. You can send him in the A and B gaps. You can send him off the edge. There are so many different things. And I guess one benefit from Harold Perkins playing a little bit more that slot-ish position that we saw him line up in 2023 is this a guy that can drop back in coverage. And I thought you saw Harold Perkins get more comfortable in that role as it went along. But at the end of the day, when you have one of the best players in the country, you got to put him around the line of scrimmage. You got to let him go impact the game. I think that's what Blake Baker is going to do. Moving to the next big question that we have, and this is probably the biggest question mark I have for this LSU team, that is the inside of this defensive line. Now, Dominic McKinley not getting to campus till the summer. He's a guy that I think factors in. I don't think there's a question that Brian Kelly is going to have to go to the transfer portal to address this position in terms of adding depth, in terms of kind of just adding some talent too. I mean, you talk about guys like Jalen Lee, they're solid. You probably don't want to be leaning on them a lot. Dill, a couple things to note. Savion Jones a guy that we were really excited about 12 months ago, making that step. He's up to 280 pounds. Shan up to 275 pounds. Blake Baker likes to get really multiple with that defensive line alignment. I wonder if you see Savion Jones, Shan move a little bit onto the inside and maybe just add some depth because you have some guys on the edge that you feel pretty good about.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. I mean, Womack looks like he's going to be a really good player. I thought you saw the flashes that you needed to see to make you think, well, we got something at the edge. I'm kind of wondering, like in the same context you kind of mentioned Shan and Savion Jones, Jackson Howard's a good-sized defensive end too. That's what you're going to look at. This defensive end room's a big bunch of guys. Yeah, you're a little thin in that interior spot, but you got big edge rushers. You got guys who can play a little bit physical, and I think that does allow you to kind of artificially make depth, if you will, or synthetically make depth, let's say, where you can kind of use those guys on those passing downs. If you got a 2nd and 10 or something like that, you can kick a Savion Jones in and give those two guys a blow. Because you kind of look now, you kind of do only have 2 true defensive tackles. I imagine you're right. Dominic McKinley looks like a guy who has ability to play right away and be really effective right away. But I'm kind of with you. I think that it would be interesting to see if they kick some of those edges down and play them on certain downs and in certain packages, just to kind of create some depth that maybe isn't there.
And they have some other guys. Like one of the guys I'm looking at is Shan Washington, right? Went to Georgia, JUCO route. Now at LSU, he's at 290 pounds. I think he can be kind of that fire hydrant defensive lineman that you're looking for on the inside. I'm looking at what this team could do post-spring practice. And again, Brian Kelly, Blake Baker, Bo Davis, they're going to do their due diligence, figure out what they have. They move some offensive alignment to the defensive side of the football. To me, this suddenly is like one of the most attractive spots for an interior defensive lineman to come play their football in 2024. Like if you see top guys hit the transfer portal, that's got to be LSU's got to be a very appealing spot. One, you're going to play on a team that I think certainly can contend for an SEC title. You're going to play for someone like Bo Davis, who just sent 3 guys to the NFL draft from that inside of the defensive line. And more importantly, I mean, there is a lot of opportunity for play time from this LSU inside of that defensive line in 2024. I trust Bo Davis. I think they need some more personnel. I think they will do that in the transfer portal. That's probably the question that you have now. I guess the second question was, right, we had 3 questions heading into spring practice, none of which really had to do on the offensive side of the football besides the fact that they're thin at running back right now, the secondary. And I think you're a massive fan of Ashton Stamps. I think you have some things you want to see from Toviano going into year 2. I'll give you the first crack at it. This LSU secondary, J.K. Johnson, back healthy, my guy. How are we feeling about that secondary? And I guess what are we looking for going into the rest of spring practice?
I mean, I honestly, in my mind, I don't think there should be much of a question. I think Zy Alexander and Ashton Stamps should be the 2 guys on the edge. When Zy Alexander was healthy, I thought he was pretty good. Yeah. And there's also an element for Ashton Stamps and Zy Alexander that, again, I don't think that defense was run very conducive to their skills. I mean, those are 2 big athletic guys who look really good in man coverage, and they just weren't allowed to play man. They played that very soft zone. I think Blake Baker puts those guys in a good position to play. I think those dudes can do it. I'm really comfortable with that spot. I think the interesting thing is what they do at JV and Toviano, because I don't think you want to waste him in that depth cornerback role this year, because I think he's got talent to play at safety. I think he can maybe make some noise in that nickel spot. You kind of saw some issues covering that deep ball on the edge and being able to just run and stay in phase with wide receivers. But again, there's things you saw. I thought he looked like he could play physically and tackle. Kind of interested to see what they do with him, because I don't necessarily want to see him sitting in that depth corner spot.
Yeah, so I mean, what Blake Baker runs is that star position, that nickel star role. And I mean, Javion Toviano coming out of high school, like that was the position where I said that's a star right there. Like that's who you want in terms of, yes, he has enough athleticism to deal and kind of work in coverage, but a guy that is really physical at the point of attack, can certainly give you some run support. I think you're right. Obviously, Zy Alexander not in for spring practice. Penciling in Ashton Stamps and Zy Alexander to be your 2 boundary cornerbacks. And again, I'll throw in J.K. Johnson. The word out of spring practice and winter workouts is he's looking ready. So then you feel a little bit more, you feel better about the depth. You also add Jair Brown in the portal. I'm kind of interested to hear and kind of see how the Sage Ryan and Javion Toviano, how does that kind of work itself out? very similar spot that we were in last year for LSU, where you have some talent. You have some guys that we're excited about. Now you got to put the puzzle piece together. Unfortunately, last year, it was just injuries, right? Injury after injury after injury. So that numbers game all of a sudden turned into we got to play what we have because we don't have anyone else that's healthy. We'll see how it shakes out. The last storyline that I want to touch on real quick after the first spring practice for LSU, that wide receiver room real quick. And again, this depth chart not updated. Should have said that at the top. Chris Hilton, Kyron Lacy, Aaron Anderson, your starting 3 wide receivers heading into spring practice. I know you're a huge fan of Hilton Jr. I know you're a huge fan of Kyron Lacy. Those 2 guys, again, flying under the radar because you were playing behind 2 first-round NFL draft picks last year. I want to talk about Aaron Anderson because we talked about what makes LSU's offense so special in my mind is the space that it creates. And to see Aaron Anderson, who just kind of got buried a little bit last year, start spring practice as a starting wide receiver excites me because what he can do with the football in his hands, he's not necessarily going to be working down the field that much. He's going to be a guy working the short intermediate route tree, and I think he can do absolute damage when he gets that football in space.
And that'll be the interesting part because you obviously add in CJ Daniels. I'm not necessarily sure he replaces what Aaron Anderson does. I mean, they're just different wide receivers. And you kind of look, Chris Hilton, that's probably your comp for CJ Daniels. So that's probably going to be the battle for who that true number 1 wide receiver X kind of role is going to be. I mean, Chris Hilton Jr. is going to be a handful to beat out because he was a monster last year. Obviously, nobody really got a ton of opportunities because the 3 they had rolling, you couldn't take any of them off the field. But I think Chris Hilton Jr. looks really good. CJ Daniels obviously can come in, and I think that's going to be a slugfest. But I think you're right. I think that those 2, Kyron Lacy and Aaron Anderson, I mean, they kind of complement what Chris Hilton likes to do. Kyron Lacy, ultra good route runner, and kind of how you described Aaron Anderson. That guy, he can kind of work in the slot. He can get downfield in the pinch, I think, because he can obviously fly. He doesn't have necessarily the size to maybe be that true boundary wide up, but from that slot, he's going to be a weapon because that speed and athleticism.
I am really interested to see what BK and Joe Sloan do with this wide receiver. Like this is more of like it's a numbers game and they're all just studs, right? CJ Daniels, it very well could be playing on Sundays next fall had he wanted to. You have guys like Chris Hilton Jr. and Kyron Lacy who are absolute studs. And then I feel like we just kind of forget about Mason Taylor, who, again, kind of flew under the radar last year, was one of the best tight ends we saw in the country as a true freshman. You start talking about all that talent at wide receiver, and then what you have with Mason Taylor, I'll throw in a guy like Trey Green coming in as a true freshman. I'm excited to see how this shakes out. I don't have any question marks about this offense. I know this offense is going to be damn good. It's more just a little bit fun to think about the different recipes and combinations Brian Kelly, Joe Sloan have to work with. We'll close it on that. Dill, again, 1 spring practice in the books. We'll get a lot more information over the coming weeks. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.